Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's CDBG NOFA and Annual Action Plan listening session for the 2024 NOFA. If you are unfamiliar with Zoom, this is actually a Zoom meeting, so it can be a little bit different than our normal office hours if you attend those. But everyone will be able to, come off mute, use your camera if you would like. We do ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentation, and everyone will be muted upon entry. So just note that. And then to ask a question to our team, similar to office hours, there should be a Q&A chat icon in your user dashboard that you can use. We'll ask that you use that for questions. Alternatively, you could use the raise hand function, and we'll call on you, and you can ask questions out loud, since this is meant to be more of a conversation. And this presentation is being recorded. It will be posted to our HCD YouTube under the Workshops and Trainings playlist. And yep, next slide, please. And for our team presenting today from HCD, we have Mimi Early, our CDBG section manager, Susan Holt, our new CDBG program manager, Felicity Gosser, Housing and Community Development Specialist 2, and myself, Michael Phillips, Housing and Community Development Specialist 1. And with that, I will pass it off to Felicity.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see so many of you here. We're really looking forward to having your feedback and giving you a sort of a little preview of what we anticipate, including in the January 2024 NOFA. Just keeping in mind that this is not a comprehensive review of what will be in the NOFA. It's just the items that we wanted to make sure that we got your feedback on and that you had sort of some advanced knowledge on as you begin to think about what you might apply for. So we will be releasing the NOFA in January of 2024. This upcoming NOFA will be for approximately $40 million. That includes approximately $10 million of the balance of 2023 funds that were not made available under the NOFA that's currently open for the over-the-counter waitlisted projects. It's the remaining amount. And then also the full amount of our 2024 HUD allocation of approximately $30 million. Our proposed method of distribution, which is basically just what method of distribution means is the way we plan to distribute the funds, is that we plan to make 81% of the funds available over the counter, and the types of activities that will be over the counter are listed in the orange box below, and I'll go into that in a little more detail in a subsequent slide. And then 9% of the funds will be made available and competitively, and that will be public services and planning, as seen in the orange box on the right. And at the bottom here on most of the slides, if you have feedback today, we'll gladly accept it during after I finish this brief presentation. And then also, if you think of something after the fact and you want to email it to us, send it to our regular CDBG inbox at cdbg@hcd.ca.gov. And if you can, please use the subject line 2024 NOFA feedback. That will help us to sort it and flag NOFA feedback, so we can make sure that we review it as we work through developing the upcoming NOFA. So as summarized on the previous slide, the NOFA will include the following as competitive solicitation activity types. Planning, public services, and planning and technical assistance will be under a competitive solicitation, and then under a over-the-counter solicitation will be infrastructure projects, public facility projects, economic development programs and projects, and housing programs and projects. And new for 2024 is that a housing program can include the following combination of housing programs: housing counseling, single-family ownership assistance, single-family housing rehab, single-family energy efficiency improvements, and code enforcement. And details on the logistics for this will be provided at NOFA training. But the bottom line is that you can design a housing program that is inclusive of multiple activity types, and anything you include among these CDBG matrix codes can be incorporated into an overarching housing program. That overarching housing program will be the thing you apply for, but you can run multiple activities under that program. Similarly, for economic development, an economic development program can include the following activities: economic development direct financial assistance to for-profits, economic development technical assistance, and economic development microenterprise assistance. Microenterprise assistance can include both direct financial assistance and technical assistance to microenterprises. And the reason we made this change was in response to the community of practice meeting we had in the spring of this year, in which we heard from many of you that you were having to seek outside funding to provide technical assistance to get small businesses ready for receiving financial assistance, and you weren't able to fund that with your CDBG funding because you were coming under the caps associated with economic development. So this is to provide you with flexibility within your economic development program and make sure that you can design it to really be able to have the resources you need to assist the small businesses and micro enterprises in your community. Again, the details on the logistics for this will be provided at NOFA training. Another new item for the 2024 Notice of Funding Availability is that rather than having set-asides for housing or economic development, instead, in order to comply with the health and safety codes that mandate that we set aside a certain amount of funds for housing and for economic development, we are going to include a component in the application that requires that you establish a nexus to housing or economic development in your over-the-counter application. So all over-the-counter applications need to have a nexus to housing or economic development. And I'll just briefly state what these statutes are. Under state statute, our legislature requires that every year we make at least 51% of CDBG funding available for activities that provide or improve housing opportunities or for purposes directly related to the provision or improvement of housing opportunities for low and moderate income households, including but not limited to the construction of infrastructure. So I'll just go into a little bit more detail on this, is that anything that you apply for that improves the quality of the living experience for people in your community. For example, water and wastewater projects that allow you to expand, give you greater capacity to build more housing, or just improves the quality of living for those houses that are in your community, would allow them to add on rooms, or would allow just for continued occupancy of the housing. That is a housing nexus. And so you can articulate, we need you to articulate what the housing nexus is if indeed your project that you're applying for has one. And then similarly, for under the Health and Safety Code 50821, we are mandated by the legislature to make 30% of CDBG funding available for economic development projects and programs. So similarly, when you are building a new infrastructure or a community center, it can attract new businesses and make a community more appealing for those businesses, make it easier for jobs in that community. Or if you're adding any kind of transportation infrastructure, adding accessibility for workers who may not have their own cars. There's a lot of ways to establish that nexus. We just need, your community's best, and we need you to tell us how that nexus is established to either or both of the state statutes. Also for 2024, we are cutting down on the number of applications that can be submitted. Grantees will be able to submit up to 2 applications, either 1 OTC over the counter and 1 competitive, or 2 competitive. We are not allowing the submittal of 2 over-the-counter applications. So you will need to make some decisions and do some priority setting at the local level so that you're applying for what you need the most this year. This is both been helpful to you locally that you don't spend a lot of energy preparing an application for which you're not going to get funded. And it also helps us to streamline our work and get the reviews of applications done more quickly, because we're not reviewing numerous applications that we can't actually fund. So it does require you to do that prioritization locally, but it should make the process more streamlined, and we'll have less denials this way. Our proposed award limits, and this was all based on the feedback, the listening sessions we conducted in, I believe it was the spring of this year, when we were preparing to launch the NOFA in June, which we ended up delaying for a number of reasons. So now we're on track for a January start date on an annual basis, but these numbers shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, because they are based on the feedback provided by all of you previously. So we've established, our proposal is that we have a per jurisdiction limit of $3.25 million. The asterisk there is that there is an exception that jurisdictions applying on behalf of a colonia or a non-federally recognized tribe may additionally apply for funds under those set aside allocations. So within that $3.25 million per jurisdiction, an applicant can apply for up to $250,000 for public services activities, or for planning and technical assistance activity up to $250,000. And then the over-the-counter solicitation for infrastructure, public facility, housing, or economic development projects that can be up to the full amount of the jurisdictional limit, $3.25 million. And then we've set a limit of $1.5 million for both housing programs and economic development programs. And those limits of $1.5 million for housing program and economic development program was just based on our experience as the administrators of the program, that is a reasonable amount of funds to expect to be able to be expended during a 3-year contract under a program design. And then we just wanted to highlight some of the changes that were recently implemented for the 2023 NOFA that's out right now that you will see again in 2024. We have reduced the number of threshold items that are required. For some examples of what we've moved from being disqualifiers to being correctable are budgets, because we know that those budgets can be a little tough. And especially this year, we are, as you saw, if you attended the NOFA training for the 2023 over the waitlisted applications, we are making some changes to the budgets. So we want to make sure we give you little room for error. We still want you to submit what's correct, and it can slow down your review process, but we will allow budgets to be corrected. We also are recognizing that the sam.gov website can be a doozy. So we do need you to submit debarment checks, but if there is an error in what you printed out, it's not going to immediately disqualify you. We will just need you to resubmit those. Examples of threshold items that have not changed and will remain the same. This is not an exclusive list. The resolution template must still be used and be correctly completed. Environmental review record must be completed prior to submission, and you still must submit readiness documentation. For example, engineers' cost estimates must be submitted for public facility and infrastructure projects. Some other items that we did to try and streamline is that we removed extra appendices from the NOFA, and instead we referenced our grants management manual. This was where we had duplication of information, or we had old information that's been updated and inserted into the grants management manual. We referred to the grants management manual instead of adding an appendix to the NOFA. We also provided application questions at NOFA release prior to the application opening date so that grantees can prepare. And then we are striving for a CDBG to be consistent from year to year so that grantees will know year after year what to expect. That is a work in progress, but that is our goal. And then we shifted the timeline back to January of each year so that you have more time to, we all collectively have more time to expend the dollars so that we are releasing the NOFA and getting the awards made before the HUD even makes the money available to us. So those are the changes recently implemented. And that is the kind of conclusion of the information we wanted to share. We are looking for your feedback on the 2022 and 2023 NOFAs. What did you like? What were some of the challenges? We know that you're mid-process on the 2023 NOFA, but anything you have to let us know on the process so far, we would appreciate. And then what are your thoughts on our proposed changes and any other feedback that you have. I'll just quickly pivot to this slide just so you can have that email address. If you think of things after we talk today and you want to get those to us, please do email us at our CDBG inbox. I'll go back to the discussion slide so that you have that and can let us know what questions and comments you have. Mike, I'll go back over to you so you can facilitate the Q&A.
Good. Thank you, Felicity. Yeah, and please submit your questions in the Q&A, but if you would like to, you can unmute yourselves and ask questions, but we do ask that you raise your hand. If you're unfamiliar with that, I think in Zoom, you can scroll down to your user dashboard. There should be a reactions button with a little smiley face icon, and you can use the raise hand function. But we do have a few questions in the Q&A. So our first question was from William. So OTC applications can be infrastructure, public facility projects, economic development programs and projects, housing programs and projects. However, based on state statute, it would also have to relate to housing or economic development. So infrastructure and public facility will only work if there is a nexus to housing or economic development.
Hi, William. Thank you for the question. Yes, what you have written there is all correct. Yes, if you are applying for an OTC application, it does need to have a housing or economic development nexus. Our thought process on this is that most community or economic development projects can establish that nexus, because any building you do that has a public benefit can generally you can establish a nexus to improving the housing quality of the existing housing or allowing for additional housing construction.
Thank you, Felicity. I'm going to jump to Beth has her hand raised. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, Beth? So I think you did.
Hi, confusion here. It's Lori.
Hi, Lori.
That's Beth. I had to use her link to get in. Sorry, she's looking at me like I don't have my hand raised. Thank you guys very much for going over this and taking the feedback. I just have 4 items that I wrote down that I would like some conversation about. First one is on the nexus between housing and business and economic development. You said can we make that conversation about both supporting housing and economic development? Okay. And then second, the NEPA approval process, because it is a disqualification item and you all are reviewing and approving NEPAs to some extent. If there is a process in advance to have those approved, is that something that you've thought about? How do we facilitate that? Or are you accepting our NEPAs as we feel that they're complete and then we make any adjustments after the fact? If you could clarify that part. The next one is in regards to the code enforcement component under the housing programs. What does that limit look like? Are we at 1.5 if we just come in with a code enforcement? I know there was some conversation, so just a clarification on that. And then I would support upping the competitive limit from 250 upwards to 500 if possible, but 250 is just sometimes not enough. So I would ask that that limit be considered and raised.
Did you want me to do the NEPA one?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Lori, just to answer your question on the NEPA, yes, we had those internal conversations on how we can be more proactive on reviewing the NEPA documents, especially the full environmental assessment. So we are working with our environmental specialists to kind of get a streamlined process on that. But in the meantime, until we can get that kind of ironed out internally, the last suggestion that you made as far as that we will accept the current NEPA documents that you submit with the application, and we will, our rep's job is to get that over to our NEPA specialist for review. So if there's any updates or corrections or anything that needs to be done, we'll do like we're doing now and communicate with you and work with you to make those updates to make it whole for the project.
And maybe what the process is for NEPA is just not changing from prior years. Like we
Right.
just, it's still you having a NEPA environmental review record completed to the best of your ability is still a threshold item. It's just that's where we don't have wiggle room, because we need to make sure that the project is qualifying upon application. So just it's not a change. It's not changing from prior years. So that's what we wanted. I just wanted to articulate that. Or we all did.
Yes.
The question about code enforcement, that's a really good question. And I didn't get into that level of detail here in the listening session, but I will. So we have moved code enforcement into housing programs to be in alignment with HUD's intentions for how a code enforcement program should be used. Code enforcement should have, according to HUD guidance, code enforcement programs should have a housing nexus and should be accompanied by access to resources for households that have code violations. So we will be in the 2024 NOFA establishing that if you are going to run a code enforcement program, then you must have resources available for correcting the code violations that you can offer to qualifying households. So we are still working through the dollar value, but we're basically going to establish that for every X dollars of code enforcement funding that you apply for, you must demonstrate that you have available Y dollars available to correct the code violations. So if you were to apply for a $1.5 million code enforcement program, then you would have to be able to demonstrate that you had either from another CDBG grant that you had already, from CDBG program income, from Cal Home, or from some general funding source, you had a set amount of funds available for a housing rehabilitation program that would be made available to households who were cited for violations. So that also can be something you apply for. So I'm sorry, I don't have that number available, but let's just use an example. So say for every $50,000 of code enforcement dollars that you apply for, you have to have $200,000 of housing rehab money available. So let's just use that as a pretend number. We're going to have a ratio in the NOFA. We're still just working on getting a few more numbers from grantees that already do this, so that we have a number that's based on reality of what makes a good program. So if you were to apply, and I'm bad at math, so if I shouldn't have picked numbers that were so hard, I should have made it a 1-to-2 relationship. So let me do that. Say you have $100,000 of code enforcement money, then you'd need double that amount for housing rehab. So if you were going to apply for $1.5 million in code enforcement funds, you'd have to demonstrate that you had $3 million available in a housing rehab program. So it's probably going to be most applicants' situation that you would apply for some of the funds for code enforcement program, and then some of the dollars would need to be used for a housing rehab program, so that you have that to support cited households. That answered that one. Maybe I'll let Lori, did that make sense? You want to?
Yeah, but if I could just state that sometimes code violations don't result in rehab. So having, a double amount might be a bit,
that was just for demonstration purposes.
Just as you're thinking through that process, when you look at that ratio,
that's why we're getting
maybe
real
for every
real
dollar
world examples.
Yeah, you have a half of it come in for, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
appreciate that clarity. I know that we have several people on the line that are very interested in how that's going to look. So thank you for that.
And as soon as we finish that math, we will get that number out, so you kind of can plan for it. We'll get it out.
Awesome.
Probably likely before we release the NOFA.
Perfect.
We understand that not every citation is going to result in assistance being provided as housing rehab. Not all cited households will qualify. Not all cited households will want the funds. And we would also, you're going to have a combination of renters and ownership units. So you do need to make a program available
I see the
to
opportunity
qual-
participation is the key to that, is just having the opportunity for the corrections for those
Exactly.
households who do qualify. Makes sense.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, and then just my last statement in
And that
regards
was
to the
your,
increase.
yeah, that was feedback that you would like the competitive limits to be quote more like $500,000 than $250,000. So we will take that feedback.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else from you, Lori, before we move on?
No, I tried to keep it all together today
Thank
rather
you.
than thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Let's see, our next question is from Jade. Does the application submittal limitation apply to colonias as well? Or how would that work if we are applying for both general and colonias allocations?
Hi, Jade. So the colonias allocation will still be the federally mandated 5% of our total NOFA. So that will not, if you're a jurisdiction that has a colonia and you're applying for the colonia, it is not subject to the application limitation, the jurisdiction limitation. You would still be subject to the, maybe correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it would still be subject to the individual activity limitations. So, but for colonias, it would be primarily for the OTC projects. So you'd be subject to the $3.25 million cap for an infrastructure project, or 1.5 for a housing program.
Well, the colonias has always been 1.5 million, so I would have to get we can get clarified. Right.
Yeah, yes. It's still it's 5% of the total award, so it's not going to exceed that. The set aside is not going to. But it should be we are doubling the NOFA though, so because it's the 2023 and the 2024 together, so that will affect the math a little bit. So we'll have Jade, we might need to get back to you on what the colonias limit would be under this NOFA, because it may be a bit different because it's kind of a double NOFA.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answered your question. For now, there's a little bit more detail we need to get to you. But your Imperial County's jurisdiction limit is not the same as the colonias limit. Those are two different limits.
Thank you, Felicity. Let's see, our next question is from Luis. The slide indicates a limit for public services. Does this mean that an application can fund more than one service?
That's an interesting question, Louise. I believe when we were conceiving of this, it was that $250,000 is enough to fund a single activity, public services activity. We were not contemplating that you would fund multiple public service activities under a single public service application. I think Mamie, I think what she's asking is, so say that you applied sort of like how the housing program is designed. So say you wanted to apply for a food bank and a senior services program, and you did one for $125,000 and the other one for another $125,000. That's not our intent. The intent is a single public services activity is what's eligible under the application.
Right. We only did the different matrix codes underneath the housing programs and economic development. It doesn't apply to the public services. So you'll still do it like we've been doing it, pick that one matrix code underneath the public service.
Yeah, and you could apply for up to 2 public services applications. That would be all you could apply for in that year, though.
Thank you, Mr. Minnie. Let's see, next question is from Ashley. Would a feasibility study to improve or reconstruct, add water, sewage system for a low-mod community be a potentially eligible project? Sorry.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks for the question. That is a potentially eligible planning application under the competitive solicitation.
Thank you, Felicity. Let's see. Our next question is from Paul. The 50% rule in effect? If so, is that just the same matrix code activity?
Hi, Paul. So the 50% rule in our guidelines is only applicable currently, only applicable to competitive applications. So it would be in effect for the competitive applications, meaning that if you had more than 50% of your public services funds still unspent, then you couldn't apply for another public services application. And Mamie, I believe our plan was to not make that matrix code specific, but rather it's type specific. So if you have a handful of public services grants, cumulatively, they would need to have more than 50% expended to qualify for a new public services award. And the same with planning. If you had more than 50% of your open planning grants expended, less than 50% of your open planning grants expended, then you would not qualify for a new planning award. So that is a change from what we've been doing recently. The 50% rule is in place to encourage prompt spending and also to ensure that we are making funding available to grantees who are spending quickly or who haven't come in for funding recently, and to not have a bunch of banked up sort of slow spending activities at once.
Yes, correct.
And this is different than our regular office hours. So if you're like, wait, didn't answer my question, I need a clarifier, you can raise your hand and we can take you off mute.
Yeah.
So feel free to do that. We can have a conversation.
Yeah. And Paul, just to let you know, we are thinking to make those changes in 25. So of the 50% rule.
Yeah, we're looking at changing our guidelines to add the 50% rule for over-the-counter applications, as Mamie said.
Looks like our next question is from William. When in January will the NOFA be released?
Good question, William. We anticipate toward the end of January. By the end of January.
Let's see. Our next question is from Paul. Let's see. I feel like your staff has sent emails saying that they won't be able to answer questions on the 2023 NOFA once released. Is that correct? Is there a reason for that, even if it is related to the new application template?
We have released the 23 NOFA. So when the application is open, we have limitations on being able to walk you through the application process. So I don't know if that's what they're referring to when they're sending that email to you, Paul. But while the NOFA is open for your review, we provided the questions of what's going to be in the application. So for those 9 over-the-counter that's going to come in for the 23 NOFA, if you guys have questions regarding how the new setup is, the parent-child relationship that we just had the webinar on, then you're more than welcome to ask us questions about how that application looks or the expectations. So, Paul, I don't know if you want to take yourself off of mute if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
It's really just related to if we're going through that application. I mean, we watched Jeannie do it the other day, but until you get in there and do your own little, sub applications and do things like that, I want to make sure that it's not like everybody goes dark for 60 days.
No, we will be here for you. So yeah, Paul, yes, no worries. We're here to support you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we've got a question in the chat. I'm just looking at the timestamps. Make sure we get everyone's question. So Jeff asks, can we include facade improvements forgivable loan component for business within an EDBA application.
I need to find the question.
I know, I don't see the question.
Oh, is it in the chat? Looks like maybe.
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Okay. Sorry. Can you read the question again? I'm sorry, I was trying to do too many things.
No, it's can we include a facade improvement forgivable loan component for business within an EDBA application?
Yes, I believe that's an eligible type of financial assistance under the economic development financial assistance matrix code. If my understanding on that is correct, then yes, that could be part of your local program design.
Thank you, Felicity. Let's see, our next question is from Kelly. So will the PI guidance documents be ready for review before the 2024 NOFA in January?
We certainly hope so. That is the plan. We have everything ready. We are just seeking HUD approval of our program income policy and procedures. And we've asked them if we can post it online, and we're waiting to hear back from HUD. So we really hope to have that posted well before the end of the year. And we understand that that is a needed piece of guidance for all of you.
Thank you, Felicity. Let's see, next question is from Nicole. The housing assistance application has multiple components that can be applied for. It is required to be more than one component, or can it just be one component?
Great question, Nicole. It can just be one component, with the exception being that if you were to apply for a code enforcement program, that you would have to demonstrate that you had sufficient funding to mitigate any code violations that you cite households for, as we kind of discussed earlier with Lori. So that's the only caveat.
Thank you, Felicity. And then just feedback from Brandy. I agree with Lori on upping competitive amounts. Public services at $250K will generally not last for 30 months.
Okay, thank you for the feedback, Brandy. Can you Brandy, could you put in because Lori said 500,000, it's helpful to have numbers. So if you have a recommended number, that would help us too.
Let's see, next question
we're trying to balance making funds available to as many grantees as possible with a feasible dollar amount, and also keeping in mind that CDBG is supposed to be gap funding. So this is also an attempt to encourage grantees to diversify their funding sources for their public services activities. I know that can be challenging. That is part of what we're doing.
Let's see, our next question is from Paul. So any additional thought given to how to deal with OTCs being submitted on that first day? Will first come, first serve. We still first come, first serve to the second per minute.
Mamie, you want to? We are thinking about it, and this is probably. I guess I'll start by saying this is we understand this is not a perfect circumstance, and we don't intend to do this every year going forward. This is what we're doing for 2024, and then we anticipate having scoring and ranking in 2025 and future. So we're having a lot of discussions about that. I don't know what we are thinking about it. And we recognize that it has some challenges and fairness issues, but that's one of the reasons we're providing the application questions in advance. But Mamie, I don't know anything else you have to say on that.
No, just Paul, when we roll out the 24, like I said, there may be some other component that's not, like I said, we're having conversations, and we have been having conversations about your exact question. So we are aware, and we just want to make it equitable across the board, because not every time first come, first serve is the best output of approving applications. So we are looking at ways to make it more equitable across the board to make sure that we are funding feasible projects to grantees that actually can meet a national objective, and really had a good plan and a thought out plan of the project. So we are thinking about all that. So hopefully to make those changes sooner than later, but for now, for 24, just, look out for the NOFA.
Thank you, Mimi. Our next question is from Jenny. Can the NEPA be done within the planning grant?
Jenny, that's a good question. I assume what you're asking is, can you use a planning grant to prepare a NEPA document? And the answer to that is yes, we are working on clarifying what can be done with planning grants. Under the federal regulations, planning can be used for sort of studies only, but we have historically also allowed it to be used for what would be called pre-development. So we're working on getting all of you and ourselves clarity on which is what. So, but the answer is yes, you can use a planning grant to prepare a NEPA environmental review document. I think that's your question. If your question is, can you do a NEPA, a planning activity also needs a NEPA, but it usually converts to exempt because it's just all you're preparing is a document. So there's also that may also, I'm not sure if that's your question. If you want to unmute yourself and clarify, that might help us. You could just raise your hand and we can come back to you if you need more clarity.
And Felicity, I just want to add, if they're going to use our planning grant for pre-development, that project has to come into some type of fruition, right?
Yeah, we're gonna, that's part of what we need to provide clarity on is if you're using your award for, sorry, this is not fully baked yet, so we're working on it. But the bottom line is that if you're using your funds for a feasibility study or some kind of a study, then the document itself meets a national objective. However, if you're using your funds for a pre-development activity, meaning it's for engineer or architectural designs, or it's for a NEPA, then you have to actually build the thing you're creating doing the pre-development for in order to and meet a national objective down the road if you are using the funds for that purpose. So there's a distinction there, and they qualify under different matrix codes. So sorry for getting in the weeds there. We do plan to prepare additional guidance on that because there's been a lack of clarity on our part. And I think that's partially due to, anyway, there's been a lack of clarity on what's the difference between planning and pre-development and what can you use the money for. So we're working to get that clarity for ourselves and for you. Thanks, Mamie, for bringing that up.
Okay.
Let's see, our next question is from Paul. So regarding the housing nexus statute, seems like you are going to be fairly flexible on this as long as we make the argument something like a park improvement project in a low mod neighborhood fit the bill for the statute.
Absolutely. It's up to you to make the case that a park improvement in that, so there's sort of that equity component of it is brand new neighborhoods usually have a new park. We usually have a park requirement. If you have older housing stock in a low and moderate income neighborhood and that park is really run down and the bathrooms are not working and the playground equipment is old and outdated and there's no ADA access, then preparing that park so that it is equitable with the park in the new development improves the housing stock. It adds value to the housing stock. It makes that neighborhood more livable. It means that people can thrive there. So that is the housing nexus. So you as the grantee, as the applicant, needs to make a powerful statement about what the housing nexus is when you're doing a park improvement project. And in this, the reason that is appropriate is, I'll just scroll back here, the statute states that the funds shall be for activities providing or improving housing opportunities. And then it also says including, but not limited to, the construction of infrastructure. So that's where we're taking that, that interpretation of the statute from.
Thank you, Felicity. Let's see, next question is from Jade. Thank you. Will you also be able to tell us how many applications we can submit under the Colonias allocation when that information is available?
Yes, Jade, we'll make sure we get you that information.
Let's see, our next question is from Louise. So in the past, ED project applications did not affect a jurisdiction's limit for the other types of activities. Has this changed? From the slides, it looks like an ED project app would count against a jurisdiction's 3.25 million max.
Yes, Louise, you're correct. This has changed. And that has to do with the way we're qualifying projects. We don't have an ED set aside anymore. We just have we have two pots, an over the counter, and for this year, an over the counter and a competitive pot. So any type of application that is submitted sorry, I'll go back to that slide. There's just, you can submit up to 2 applications, one over the counter and one competitive, or 2 competitive. Or you can choose to submit 1 over the counter for the that jurisdictional maximum of $3.25 million. But you cannot submit 2 over the counter applications.
Thank you, Felicity. Let's see, next question is from Lindsay. See, our city, Loyalton, will be going out for a planning grant to begin the process of building a community center in the city center. Will we have to submit the full application as if we are applying for the OTC? So Shannon told us that did provide me with a link to the 2023 NOFA. Should I use that as my template until the 2024 one is released? Since I'm so green, so this is, I'm kind of unclear as to what we are supposed to be including, since we have had no environmental surveys done in decades. Do we have to have those done for the planning grant?
Hi, Lindsay, nice to see you here. You can't use the 2023 NOFA or application in its entirety for a planning grant because planning grants weren't part of the 2023 NOFA.
Got it.
So I think we can keep working with you until the NOFA is released to kind of identify what are the general components in a planning grant, but there isn't, the guidance is going to be in, it's fairly similar, I think, in terms of what you need to submit to the 2022 application. So Shannon could work with you on what was required there for planning applications. There's not big changes in what the requirements are for to be competitive.
Is that online I can find, or can she just, I can have her send me the link, or can I find that online?
It's closed, so it is not available online. I don't think, Mamie, unless
No,
I'll let Mamie let you know where the resources might be. Sorry,
yeah,
Mamie.
it is closed, but of course, you can always work with Shannon, and she can give you a little bit more details on what questions that we did ask in our planning application for 2022, and then also providing you with the matrix codes that has the definitions. Will be able to help you identify where you fall in to the planning grant as well. So, I encourage all the grantees to, set up those meetings with your reps to have those discussions. And even if you're having ideas of what you want to apply for, to see what will be priority for you, we're here to be able to support you, to help you navigate through those decisions at your local level. Like Felicity says, you guys will have to make those decisions on what you're going to come in for. So Shannon is welcome knowledge, so she should be able to support you on being able to help you before that NOFA rolls out at the end of January. So you'll be prepared.
Got it. Okay, yeah, because she did send me that. Maybe we weren't clear as to saying that we wanted to go for a planning grant. So when she sent me that and I started going through it, it just didn't seem clear to me how I was going to. But eventually we'll probably be applying for the OTC, obviously with the planning grant. But I just didn't know. I was like, this seems way too complicated. So I will reach back out to her and I'll have her hopefully give me all that information, and then maybe all my answers will be my questions will be answered. So thanks, ladies.
Yes. Well, glad to see you joining.
Likewise.
Yeah, we're super excited to have Loyalton come back in. It's been many, many decades, I think. So glad to see your project coming to fruition.
So many decades. Yes, thank you.
Let's see. Your next question is from Janet. The 50% role for public services activities. Does this include CDBG CV contracts?
It does not.
It does not, Janet.
Let's see. Your next question is from Ellie. If I want to apply to a public service competitive, but I already have a planning and it's not 51% spent yet, can I still apply for public service competitive?
Mamie, my understanding is yes. It's planning and public services are not interactive. If you have a planning grant that's not yet 51% expended, that doesn't impact your ability to apply for a public services application. If it was a public services application of any matrix code, then it would impact your ability to apply.
Right.
That's how it's written, right? Our drafted NOFA.
Yes.
Yes. So the answer is it doesn't impact your ability to apply for a public services competitive application, Ellie. Your jurisdiction can apply for public services, even if your planning application is not 50% expended by the close date of the application. But keeping in mind that the date that we measure the 50% expenditure is the close date of the application closing. So if we release the application in the end of January, release the NOFA at the end of January, give 30 days for NOFA review. That takes us to the end of February, and then March and April. The applications aren't due until the end of April.
Great. Thank you, Felicity. Then we have a number of kind of support for the 500,000 public services cap. Brandy, Murray, Amy, Cynthia. There's one more to Rob. And another one just came in, Marcos. So yeah, we'll definitely take that feedback. Next question is from Kelly. Do you have any language around the intent of CDBG being gap funding that you could share or point to?
That's a good question, Kelly. There is language in the regulations about CDBG being gap funding.
I know if me personally, I know that if you Google CDBG, it states in the language and gives you an explanation, the intent of CDBG being gap funding. And like I said, I can look up that link to where that language lives, if that's what you're asking for, Kelly.
Yeah, we can find the language, and I can just say that general practice across the country is that CDBG is to augment and fill gaps in funding where other loan funding is used, other state provided financing or grant funding for infrastructure projects, and then particularly for public services, there is very specific language around public services that CDBG cannot supplant general fund dollars, for example. So if you're running a Meals on Wheels program and you've been using your general fund dollars for years, you can't say, oh, there's a CDBG grant available, I'll bring this in and use this instead and use my general fund for something else. That's explicitly disallowed. What is allowed is say you currently serve 50 households and you want to increase your number to 75, you could use CDBG to add add capacity to an existing public services program. So that component of it is explicit in the regulation. I hope that might be helpful.
And it's also in our 23 NOFA as well, and of that gap funding as well.
Let's see, our next question is from Lori. Can you review the timing of the funding availability? If I recall, you had outlined the applications due around April 2024 and funds available to the jurisdictions to expend in December 2024. Can you review these timelines once again to confirm?
Sure, I think I will to the best of my knowledge. We are always trying to streamline and speed up our process. But the basic, in terms of the deadline for the application, that won't change. So we anticipate making the NOFA available at the end of January. You would have from the 1st of February to the first couple days of March, 30 days from the NOFA release to review the materials and prepare your application, do your public hearings, etc. That would take us to an open application. Let's just say March 1st for ease of discussion, but it'll be 30 days from the NOFA release. And then you would have all of March, and we have 60 days from NOFA opening to submit an application. For the OTC, it would be till it's either 60 days or until funds are exhausted, whichever comes first. And then that takes us, so let's just say it's the end of April is when everything is submitted. And then my memory gets a little fuzzy on all of the different components. I know we were going to sort of provide a timeline of all the internal reviews and then the routing to our internal loan committee and for award packaging, but it does take a few months after that to get your awards, to get your standard agreements executed. Mamie, I don't have that information in front of me. We can put it in the upcoming office hours. I don't want to put us on the spot because it's a little bit outside of our hands. We try to do our best to get the program reviews done as quickly as possible. We'll put an estimated timeline in upcoming office hours for what happens after you submit. Because we had promised, we promised we'd do that, didn't we?
Yeah. But once we do that, just, please, kind of be patient with us because we are dealing with internal departments that are reviewing and part of the routing process of executing the standard agreement. So our program, CDBG, sometimes we don't have that oversight and that control on that turn time. So that's where the timeline that we will create will be really true estimates of what we have experienced in the past. So we can, possibly be better and produce sooner, or it can be later, depending on what's being routing at the same time as our standard agreements.
And one of the ways we're trying to speed up the process is by doing what you're seeing in the preview of in the 2023 application, which is that we are going back. If any of you are old timers, we're going back a little bit, but also forward in having a single standard agreement for all activities applied for in a given program year, with just sort of with the scopes of work for each individual activity listed in your standard agreement. So we are only going to be working on a single contract to route per year per jurisdiction. So that should make our volume go down, and that should make things go a little faster, we hope. I'm seeing that we are at time, but we have a number of additional pieces of feedback and questions. I want to be respectful of folks' time, so maybe we will take one more, and then we will, what we can do is we can even we'll discuss how we can answer the rest of the questions. We could maybe roll it into next week's office hours in terms of responding and get those answers out to you in writing. Does that sound like an okay plan, Mamie?
Yes.
All right, this is Stephen. Our last question is from Jade. So what time frame would there need to be if we are using a PTA for pre-development to go into fruition?
Oh, you mean what time? But in what time would you need to meet a national objective? That is something we're working. I said we were kind of working on establishing clarity on the planning guidelines. I don't want to give a date on that yet. It's gonna have to be something reasonable, not too far in the future. The regulations are silent on that, so don't have a number of it's years, a certain number of years, but I don't have that yet.
Alrighty. That's all the questions that we're going to be able to get to today. So we'll keep a log of all these questions and make sure they get answered in either office hours, or we can e-blast them out or something like that. We'll make sure to get all of your questions answered. So thank you everyone for attending today, and let us know if you have any other additional feedback. I think send them to cdbg@hcd.ca.gov with the tagline 2024 NOFA feedback. And thank you all for attending, and hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.